Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. After finishing his visit to Japan, Czech President Pavel went to India to meet with the Dalai Lama. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs criticized President Pavel for disregarding China's repeated representations in firm opposition, insisting on going to India to meet with the Dalai Lama. This, they said, seriously violates the political commitments the Czech government made to the Chinese government and undermines China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said that China has already lodged a stern protest with the Czech side, and in response to Pavel's egregious and provocative actions, China has decided to cease all contact with him. Don't think that China's strong condemnation and decision to cut off all contact are just empty words. I believe there will be concrete measures in the future that will make the Czech Republic truly feel the pain. Canada is currently struggling economically due to the tariffs imposed by U.S. President Trump. The newly appointed Prime Minister Carney has recently introduced a series of measures targeting China, clearly aiming to curry favor with Trump. China has made it clear from the start that no country is allowed to use harming China's interests as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the United States. China will definitely defend its own interests. To put it bluntly, there will be countermeasures. On August 12, China's Ministry of Commerce announced the launch of an anti-dumping investigation into pea starch imported from Canada. The spokesperson stated that this investigation is fundamentally different from the discriminatory measures Canada has recently taken against China. The Ministry of Commerce announced that on June 26 this year, it received a formal application from 6 Chinese companies representing the domestic pea starch industry, requesting an anti-dumping investigation into pea starch imported from Canada. The Ministry of Commerce conducted a review in accordance with relevant regulations. Based on the results of the review and in accordance with China's anti-dumping regulations, the Ministry of Commerce decided to launch an anti-dumping investigation into pea starch imported from Canada starting Tuesday. Pea starch is mainly used in the production of vermicelli and liangfen, and can also serve as a thickener, stabilizer, emulsifier, and binder, with applications in food, pharmaceuticals, and other fields. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Commerce, responding to a reporter's question, stated that this anti-dumping investigation was initiated in response to an application from the Chinese industry. After receiving the application from the domestic industry, the investigating authority reviewed the application in accordance with relevant Chinese laws and regulations, and in compliance with WTO rules. They determined that the application met the conditions for initiating an anti-dumping investigation and decided to launch the investigation. The spokesperson emphasized that anti-dumping investigations are legitimate trade measures in line with WTO rules to protect domestic industries, and stressed that China's initiation of an anti-dumping investigation into pea starch imports from Canada is fundamentally different from the recent discriminatory measures taken by Canada against China that violate WTO rules. Earlier, on July 16, Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau announced that, in order to protect domestic manufacturers, Canada would tighten steel product quotas for countries without free trade agreements, including China. This year, steel imports from these countries must be cut in half, and any amount exceeding the quota will be subject to an additional 50% tariff. For steel products imported from countries other than the United States, as long as they contain steel that was melted and poured in China, a 25% tariff will also be imposed starting at the end of this month. To put it plainly, these measures by Canada are basically targeting Chinese steel products. On the same day, China's Ministry of Commerce also announced that its investigation had preliminarily determined that imported canola originating from Canada was being dumped, causing substantial harm to China's domestic canola industry, and that there was a causal relationship between the dumping and the substantial harm. Starting from August 14, importers are required to provide a corresponding deposit to Chinese customs based on the determined deposit rates for each company when importing the investigated products. In other words, Canadian canola will now be subject to tariffs. On September 9 last year, the Ministry of Commerce issued an announcement to launch an anti-dumping investigation into imported canola originating from Canada. Based on facts and evidence, the preliminary ruling is, there is dumping of canola imported from Canada, with a dumping margin of 75.8%. The spokesperson stated that China has always exercised caution and restraint in using trade remedy measures, and is committed to upholding fair and free trade. Next, the investigation will continue in accordance with the law, fully safeguarding the rights of all interested parties, and a final decision will be made objectively and fairly based on the investigation results. To sum up a few observations, first, recently, Canada has cooperated with the US in restricting Chinese steel imports, clearly sacrificing China's legitimate interests to curry favor with Trump. Naturally, China will respond in kind by launching an investigation into pea starch. Following canola, China has now launched an investigation into Canadian pea starch. Canadian agricultural products have always been quite dependent on the Chinese market, making them an ideal target for countermeasures. Second, on the same day, the Ministry of Commerce also announced that after Canada followed the US last year in imposing additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, China responded by launching an anti-dumping investigation into canola, which has now yielded preliminary results. And just 2 days later, importers will be required to pay a deposit, which is essentially a prepayment of punitive tariffs, immediately making Canadian canola much more expensive. Naturally, Chinese importers will turn to other regions to buy the same products, leaving Canadian farmers with nothing but tears. Third, it's worth noting that Canada is not only trying to please Trump by targeting China in trade matters. As this year's G7 host, it has also taken the lead in rallying the G7 and the EU to use the Hong Kong issue to smear Hong Kong police for issuing wanted notices against so-called Hong Kong parliament members who broke the law. Yeah, they're trying to use Hong Kong to contain China. This time, China's counterattack is no small matter. The new government under Carney hasn't even found its footing yet, but it's already picking fights with both China and the US, the two biggest economies. Just like the EU, it's likely to end up pleasing no one. Canada and the EU are always stirring up trouble, only to hurt their own products' market share in China. In fact, even Trump had to face reality and beg China to buy American agricultural products. The Trump administration's misguided tariffs almost completely blocked American agricultural exports to China, causing American farmers, who lost access to this huge market, to complain bitterly. Faced with this situation, even Trump couldn't take it anymore. According to a Reuters report, on August 10, Trump posted on social media, urging China to quadruple its orders for American soybeans. He even promised to provide fast service for China. No sooner had Trump spoken than soybean prices on the Chicago Board of Trade soared to a 2-week high on August 11. On the same day, Trump signed an executive order to extend the suspension of tariffs on China for another 90 days. Reuters reported that, due to the trade friction between China and the US, China, the world's largest soybean importer, had not yet pre-ordered any new season US soybeans. With the US soybean harvest and export season approaching, this unusual delay has sparked concerns among American farmers and traders. China began importing US soybeans in 1995, and usually starts placing orders for soybeans harvested in the fall as early as the beginning of the year. Earlier this year, Bloom, the chief market analyst at a US brokerage specializing in agricultural risk management, pointed out in a report that China has yet to purchase even a single shipment of new season US soybeans, making it extremely difficult to sell the new crop. This is the latest start for China in the US soybean market since 2005. Bloom said this will push US-China soybean trade into uncharted territory. On the 10th, Trump said in a post that he would provide expedited service for China to purchase US soybeans. However, he still insisted that China is actually very worried about a soybean shortage, and that this is a way to significantly reduce the US-China trade deficit. But if you look at the numbers, China is not short of soybeans at all. In recent years, soybeans from Brazil, Argentina, and other countries have quickly filled the gap left by US soybeans in the Chinese market. According to data from the General Administration of Customs, in 2024 China imported about 105 million tons of soybeans. Of these, 13 million tons were imported from the US, a year-on-year decrease of 5.4%, while 65 million tons came from Brazil, a year-on-year increase of 6.7%. In 2024, China also imported 1 million tons of soybeans from Argentina. Reuters reported that if the amount of soybeans purchased from the US were to be increased fourfold, it would mean that the vast majority of China's soybean imports would have to come from the US. Traders said that earlier this year, China's soybean imports had already reached a record high, and since then, the market has been oversupplied, which could dampen demand for soybeans. Xian Huoliang, founder of Tianjin Qingshui Yudao Enterprise Management Consulting Company, said that it's basically impossible for China to increase its soybean purchases from the U.S. by 4 times. Currently, U.S. soybean exports to China are facing fierce competition from Brazil, which is the world's largest soybean producer and exporter. The New York Times previously reported that over the past decade, China has made significant investments in Brazil's warehouses, railways, ports, and other infrastructure, which will make it even easier for Brazilian soybeans to be shipped to China. In Beijing, Pei Shixia, an agricultural analyst at Chaihui Consulting, believes that Beijing has already sent out quite a few signals indicating that China is ready to completely stop buying U.S. soybeans this year. Reuters pointed out that although American soybean producers have been working hard to find other buyers, no country can compare to China. Sutter, the CEO of the U.S. Soybean Export Council, said that while American producers are trying to reduce their dependence on China, China is still crucial to them. The conclusion is that even someone as strong as Trump has to rely on China to buy American soybeans. In the trade war, Trump misjudged China, which led to the U.S. shooting itself in the foot, and now it may have to face the prospect of losing its share of the Chinese market for the long term. So how could Canada possibly profit by harming China's interests?